Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the X-Ray Woman action figure from the Fisher-Price Adventure People line. The first Fisher-Price Adventure People went on sale in 1975. When they first arrived on the shelves, they were only available with sets that included a vehicle. There was a sports plane with one figure, a pilot, a rescue truck with two figures, a rescue copter with two figures, and a huge safari set with a truck and trailer and four figures, as well as a pop-up tent, a couple of cages, 5 animals, a couple of sleeping bags, a fence, and a movie camera. The sets were successful, but they were expensive, so the next year, Fisher-Price came out with smaller sets for 1976 that included a couple of figures and a few other pieces, but no big vehicles. This gave parents the chance to test out the Adventure People line with their kids without having to spend a lot of money on one of the bigger sets. Considering these sets were all available for several years, the plan must have worked. The fact that the Adventure People line ran for a full decade confirms that Fisher-Price did well with this line. You may have heard the phrase, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." Well, I hope Fisher-Price was flattered when Kenner released their Star Wars figures in 1978, because they were not only influenced by the Fisher-Price Adventure People line, but the mock-ups for several of the original 12 Star Wars figures were literally modified Adventure People. When the Star Wars figures hit the shelves, it turned the toy industry upside down. Kids could not get enough of them, and it seemed like everyone was trying to get a piece of that space toy action. Even Fisher-Price, who had been the motivation for the look and style of these Star Wars figures, added a lot of new space-themed sets to the Adventure People line, hoping to cash in. One of the coolest ideas, in my opinion, was the translucent green space couple, X-Ray Man and X-Ray Woman. For this video, I'm just focusing on X-Ray Woman, but most of the information about her applies to X-Ray Man as well. Although I would imagine that most people who played with action figures in the late 70s and early 80s are at least familiar with the Adventure People, I've learned that many people aren't familiar with X-Ray Woman. I've read a lot of conflicting information about the release date for this figure. I've heard everything from 1976 to 1982. But based on what I've seen, I think it's more likely that the X-Ray Woman figure came out in 1981 because most of the newspaper and catalog ads that I see with this figure are from 1981. If I'm correct, that would mean she was in stores for fewer years than some of the other figures, so there aren't as many of her and not as many people have seen her as some of the more common figures, like the Cycle Racing Team, which was available from 1977 all the way up to 1984, or the Nurse and the Fireman, who were available in various sets or carded pretty much the entire run of the Adventure People line. I really liked toys made out of clear-colored plastic as a kid, so I thought these figures were cool from the moment that I first saw them, which was unfortunately many years after they were available in stores. I totally missed out. They could have joined a lot of my action figures in their various adventures. Star Wars figures may be the most obvious line for space-themed Adventure People to sneak in. Even my non-space-themed Adventure People filled in some of the gaps in my Star Wars universe until I could get the actual figures that I wanted. But there were so many lines of action figures in this scale around the time that the X-Ray Woman came out that I'm sure she was thrown into the stories of many different lines by different kids over the years. Her clear-colored plastic made her a great fit for both the similar Tron line and the Crystar action figures. She would have also fit in well with the clear time travelers from Mego's Micronauts line. Since she seemed to be a robot, she could fit in with the adventures of Battlestar Galactica. Every week it seemed like Buck Rogers was hooking up with another hottie. I don't know if he'd hook up with a translucent green robot, but I bet Captain Kirk would, and my Star Trek motion picture figures were short on both female characters and non-crew members. Creating new figures that had more of a space theme could have been an expensive decision for Fisher-Price, and I'm sure those space vehicles did cost a lot to produce. but many of the figures were just newly colored versions of already existing figures and figure parts. That meant Fisher-Price could save a lot of money on sculpts and molds. The X-Ray Woman action figure was just a clear green version of the female swimmers, which were already in production. Adventure People were extremely well constructed compared to other 3 3/4 inch action figures. They didn't lose their heads or have their thumbs break off as easily as some other figures, and as a result, there are a lot more of the Fisher-Price Adventure People still around despite years of action, although some might be sun-faded or missing paint. But the X-Ray Woman isn't as easy to find as many of the others, and she seems to be in greater demand, selling for a higher price than the more common figures in the line. I wouldn't say she's really expensive compared to figures from some other toy lines from this time, but compared to other Adventure People, she's not one of the cheapest figures. Of course, the prices for carded figures seems to have been going up over the last few years, so a nice packaged figure will certainly cost a good bit more than a loose one. Speaking of the packaging, the X-Ray Woman wasn't available in any sets or with any of the plain tan cards. She was only available on a card with a painting of the character on the front. These cards look awesome, and I'm lucky that I was able to add a carded X-Ray Woman to my collection. On the artwork, we see X-Ray Woman in the foreground with X-Ray Man in the background. The X-Ray Man card, which I don't have, is the opposite, with X-Ray Man in the foreground and X-Ray Woman walking past in the background. On the back of the card, we see several of the sets that were available at the time and some of the other figures that were available by themselves without a set. One thing that's missing from the card is any information about the character. Aside from her name, we really don't know much at all about this figure, encouraging kids to make up their own stories about these very cool toys. The Adventure People toy line ran from 1975 all the way through 1985, a very impressive run for a line of toys that wasn't supported by a movie, a TV show, or a comic book. I enjoyed playing with them as a kid. They were great both on their own and paired up with other toy lines from the time. Over the last few years, I've enjoyed starting collecting the line again and learning a lot that I never knew about the line before. Did you play with Fisher-Price Adventure People as a kid? Did you have the X-Ray Woman figure? If so, what other lines of action figures did she join in your adventures? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a like, share it on social media, and if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell. And one last thing, if you collect toys, you should know about Toylanta, one of the biggest toy shows in the southeastern United States, held annually just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Visit Toylanta.com for more information. As always, thanks for watching.